Alright everyone, I think we'll be starting slowly now. We're expecting some people will be trickling in, but we'll get started. So welcome everyone to our first Inspiring Peacemaker event of this semester. It's so nice to be back and seeing some familiar faces, some new faces. My name is Emma and this is the co-president Olivia. We are the new co-presidents since March, and we're both really excited to continue the important work of the Peacebuilding Initiative and connecting students with peacemakers and really spreading inspiring stories about the field we're doing and inspiring to do. So I want to start off with giving a big thank you to the FAB and Nagolendra Philanthropy Alliance, the Center for Conflict Development and Peacebuilding, for supporting us and sponsoring this event we're holding today. Also a big thank you to our Director of Studies, Nabil Roxal, for always supporting us at the Peacebuilding Initiative. So before passing it on to Olivia and our two speakers today, I will give the floor to Her Excellency Khadra Ahmed Douela, the Permanent Representative of Somalia to the United Nations Office of Geneva, and she will say a few words about the important topic we're going to talk about today at our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. My name is Khadra Douela, as I mentioned. I'm the ambassador and the permanent representative for Somalia for both Switzerland and Austria. I also think I'm a bit of a diplomatic geek, so when I was asked to come and speak, I ended up writing 5 pages. So I will try to condense it as best as I can. So good afternoon. It's a privilege, honestly. I love, I spend the majority of my career in academia, so students are very close to my heart. I worked at New York University, I worked in Qatar for like 12 years with Carnegie Mellon University in Qatar, so I truly believe the future belongs to the youth. So I will just start talking about my topic matter. So it's a privilege to join you today at this vital conversation hosted by the Peacebuilding Initiative and the Noble London. I told John I'm going to kill your name. But mine has been killed my whole life, so I can never use it. Philanthropy Alliance. To Dorothy and John, whose commitment reminds us that peace is both a vision and a practice, thank you. To Olivia, our moderator, and to all who gathered here today, let us lean into today's discussion with open minds and determined hearts. We convene at a time when the non-profit and the social impact sector faces unprecedented challenges. Funding cuts from USAID, UK aid, and others ripple across the globe. These reductions are felt not only in the corridors of Geneva's global headquarters, but in remote villages where a clinic loses medicine, a school closes its doors, or a peace-building workshop is cancelled. The year 2024 has marked by perpetual crisis. I'm almost scared to look at the news. Conflicts, climate disasters, and economic instability, which force non-profits into survival mode, leaving little room to reflect and adapt. Now in 2025, we face a pivotal question. How do we sustain impact when resources shrink and demands grow? Many people look to technology, but while technology offers transformative tools, it's not a universal remedy or treatment. Let us also turn to human-centered solutions that anchor our work in dignity, equity, and resilience. It's critical to center community-led peace building. Lasting change begins with those most affected by conflict, like Somalia. We've learned that sustainable peace cannot be imported, it must be grown locally. Trusted community leaders, women collectives, and youth networks are not just beneficiaries, but architects of solutions. When we shift power to grassroots voices, we unlock creativity and ownership no algorithm can replicate. Another point I'd like to make is investing in radical collaboration. In a fragmented world, silos are fatal. Non-profits must forge unlikely alliances, partnering with private sectors for resource sharing, academia for research, and even former adversaries for dialogue. When Interpeace collaborates with local governments or NGOs cross-pollinate strategies across borders, we amplify impact. Prioritizing investing in mental resilience. Burnout plagues our sector. How can we expect peacemakers to heal others if they're not healed themselves? Organizations must prioritize psychosocial support for staff and volunteers, whether through trauma-informed training, sabbaticals, or safe spaces to process grief. A resilient workforce is the backbone of sustained impact. It's also necessary for adaptive leadership. The era of rigid hierarchies are really over. Leaders must cultivate humility, cultural agility, and the courage to unlearn. This means embracing failure as a teacher, decentralizing decision-making, and fostering environments where junior staff can challenge outdated norms. As a Somali prophet goes, "Aqoon la'aan wa iftiin la'aan." Basically what it means is without knowledge, there is no light. Viewing the importance of advocacy as a lifeline. Funding cuts are political choices. We must advocate relentlessly, and not just for budgets, but for reimagining of aid. This means reframing narratives. Peace building is not a cost, but an investment in stability. Climate change is not charity, but a debt owed to the global south. Let us lobby for systematic shifts, not stopgap fixes. The importance of cultivating local resource networks. Dependency of foreign aid is unsustainable. Micro-donations from diaspora communities, barter assistance between neighboring villages, or social enterprises that fund programs. These models empower communities to thrive on their own terms. In Somalia, women-led cooperatives now fund schools through artisan craft. This is resilience. A call to reclaim purpose. The non-profit sector's greatest strength is its humanity. Let's not lose ourselves in the chase for efficiency. A child in a refugee camp does not need a perfect AI-generated report. She needs a mentor who shows up day after day. A farmer battling drought does not need a donor spreadsheet. He needs a neighbor's wisdom on drought-resistant crops. Technology is a tool, but connection is our currency. The reality today, the Trump administration's foreign policy has laid bare the fragility of Africa's external dependencies. Yet within this crisis lies an unprecedented opportunity to refine the continent's global posture. By leveraging great power competition, accelerating continental integration, and prioritizing domestic resource efficacy, African states can transform this moment of upheaval into a catalyst for structural transformation. Africa must realize in this moment what it is, a huge wake-up call to refine its place in global affairs. Will the continent seize the opportunity, or will it remain a passive actor in the shifting tides of international policies? Definitely, the choice is for Africa to make. In closing, I return to the Somali story. Decades of war taught us that hope is not passive. It's the act of planting trees in a storm. Today, let us plant seeds of collaboration, courage, and radical trust. We must not falter nor lose hope. To those asking, is 2025 the end? I say it's a beginning. A beginning where we measure success not by budgets, but by lives rebuilt. Not by scale, but by depth. Let's live up to our values of creating a better world for all. Let this dialogue ignite the beginning. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your words of inspiration and your support for being here with the Peace Building Initiative. We really appreciate having you here with us today. And I think it's very true what the Ambassador said, and we can all take those lessons with us here today, that we as a collective, we're truly positioned at a crossroads in humanitarian solutions. And there are many challenges right now that we're facing that need contemporary work together both humanitarian, the use of new technology, and climate change. So right now we're focused on the future and let this truly serve as the beginning of what's next for humanitarian action. Today with us here today, we look forward to hearing from Sarah Noble and Dr. Tania Tam, who have years of experience working in international development, peace, and innovation for sustainable development solutions. Recent situations involving the backlash of diversity, equity, and inclusion objectives, development and the financing of social and humanitarian aid, and questioning of social impacts and initiatives have led many students, involving myself, questioning how, where, and what we can do exactly to position ourselves as sustainable leaders for tomorrow's future and today's challenges as well in global development. It is for these reasons that today, with our Inspiring Peacemakers series, we will center on the focus of nonprofit and social impact careers. And hopefully this will provide us with some hope and advice to all of our aspiring peacemakers and audience members joined with us today. So here we have Sarah Noble, who is a Canadian-born peace advocate currently based in Geneva. She has over 20 years of experience in global organizations and focuses on peace building, humanitarian issues, and nonprofit public interest media. Sarah is the head of global engagement at the Caux Initiatives of Change Foundation, where she works on inner development and linkages between arts and peace. She is also the co-founder of the PeaceTalks at Interpeace, a storytelling platform that showcases inspirational stories of peace. She is passionate about storytelling as a tool for healing and social change. Sarah believes in storytelling and the power to address global challenges. She is the mom of 2 kids and is motivated by the desire to be a good ancestor. We also have Dr. Tania Tam, who is a behavioral scientist who has conducted award-winning research on international development work. She was working with USAID until recently when it was shut down. She is also a faculty lead here at the Geneva Graduate Institute in the Applied Research Program, which some of you may have as your faculty lead for your projects, and also trains teachers and professors to help their students on developing psychosocial skills to flourish in a world filled with transitional periods. Tania received her doctorate in the psychology of conflict of Northern Ireland from Oxford University. She applies her work and research and has published extensively in the top journals in the field. Tania also speaks 4 languages and has worked as a professor of psychology as well for many companies and international organizations. Her experience includes work in over 25 countries. So please put your hands together and welcome our speakers today. Thank you. So I'd like to start off our conversation with some questions and storytelling for social change and inspiration. Sarah, as this aligns well with your beliefs in storytelling for peace, I'd love to hear more about your story. How did you get into your journey in peace building, arts and peace, and nonprofit? And what drew you to this area in particular?
Great. Well, lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. And lovely to hear the words of the Madam Ambassador. I resonate with them. And great to be with all of you. So my name is Sarah, and my interest in international affairs started at a young age. So I'm a product of the 1980s when there was this thing called a television, and there was a remote control, and you watched the television and the news at a certain time. There was no internet. And when I was a little kid, we used to watch the 6 p.m. news, and I was always really interested in the stories on the news and what was happening. And so I was really interested in what was going on. And as I grew up, I continued to follow the news. So I've had an interest in following what's been going on in the world. And when I went to high school, I did a lot of Model UN conferences. So I'm sure how many of you have done Model UN conferences for your friends? Is there a few? Great. So I loved Model UN conferences very much because they enabled you to see how we can solve really big problems, and it in a way that you focused on dialogue, in a way that you had to use your imagination to think about things, in a way that you had to often if you were playing the role of a different country that was very different to your own, you would have to develop empathy to put yourself into somebody's shoes, and to how you could use dialogue and work with somebody across the table to solve problems. So I remember going to the UN in the headquarters in New York, and going on a tour of the UN, and this was for me the most incredible thing in the world. And we got to this point where there's a beautiful mosaic that was made by Norman Rockwell, who's a U.S. Artist, and it's a glass mosaic, and you should Google it because it's beautiful, and it's people of all faiths from all over the world, and it says the golden rule. It says, "Do unto others that you would have do unto yourself." And this was actually a gift given to the United Nations by the United States in the 1980s. And when I saw this, it really resonated with me, and it was actually a poster that I kept in my university dorm room to remind me of this notion of our interconnectedness. And so for me, this has kind of been the path, and I was really motivated, and so I did a Master's in International Relations in Canada, where I'm from, and then I did an internship at a peacekeeping center, and that's when I heard about an organization, which at the time was called WSP International, that was using a pioneering approach to help people build peace, as opposed to coming in from the outside and imposing peace. It was helping and working with people from that country for them to really take the lead in local ownership. At that time, that was 20 years ago. This was pioneering. Now everybody, this is accepted as the way that you have to build peace. But that organization, which is now called Interpeace, and so that was 20 years ago, and that's how I ended up here.
Wow, that's great. I definitely remember being a kid growing up too, and I would always watch the 6 p.m. news with my parents. That was the daily program that we would do. So that's really great to hear, and I think your story of do unto others, that just reminds us how important it is to work together as a society, and everybody is responsible for furthering the peace agenda in every area that they're working in. And Tania, I'd love to hear from you as well, how you got into peace and social development.
Okay, so I grew up in a very small Chinese neighborhood in San Francisco. And so when I chose to do my PhD, I wanted to do cross-cultural relationships. Because growing up as a Chinese person, there's very different rules to growing up as an American, right? Just for example, raising your hand and putting yourself out there, that's an American thing to do. And stepping back and listening to others and making sure that you're doing the right thing, that's more a Chinese cultural thing to do. And so what I wanted to see was how these cultures clashed and how people basically went about their lives in different ways psychologically. So that was what I applied to do for my PhD. But when I got there, there was funding for going straight up to Northern Ireland. There was a civil war back then. There was a violent conflict called the Troubles, diminutively, between Catholic and Protestant extremist factions. Basically I got the scholarship and decided I did the rest of my PhD on Northern Ireland. So that was the big shift. So I feel like there are a lot of opportunities that present themselves to you, and you just kind of grab onto it no matter how different they are. I knew nothing about the Northern Irish conflict when I started. It was very, very new to me. I couldn't tell the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic when I got there. I had to ask, what religion are you? Which is a really awkward question. I had to interview people about how do you feel towards Protestants on a scale of 1 to 10. And this was how I did my research, so I learned a lot going through there. And at the time, what was going on was that there were a lot of mathematical modelings of where violence would occur across in England, in Northern Ireland. Where would you find a bomb, for example? And what I did instead was do mathematical modeling of where peace would occur, because I met a lot of people who were working together to desegregate their schools, right? I met a lot of people who wanted to become friends with people from the other side and actively sought them out. And what I wanted to do was figure out what motivates people to do this, because I feel like this is the story that's untold. And right now, you never hear about all the untold stories of peace because they're not as actively in your face as Ukraine is right now, for example, or negative stories of Gaza. These are the things that capture your attention and make you anxious. But there are so many stories of peace that I feel like get dropped. And so that was actually what I did my PhD on. It was positive instruments of change in societies of conflict. You never hear about what happened in World War II, Germany versus France, France versus England. All of these wars are in the past and forgotten, when I think they're actually really relevant to today's world. And so this is my own background and how I got there. Okay, so after that I became a team leader of conflict resolution program in Lebanon, also looking at sectarian conflicts, and after that I joined USAID. So I've been working for USAID, for NATO, for the UN, different organizations, mostly as a monitoring and evaluation advisor, and I can tell you guys more about that coming up as one of the fields you guys might be interested in.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think it's really important right now to be able to focus and uplift those positive stories as peace, because especially in society, I feel we're very focused on sharing all of the negative aspects that are ongoing, which of course are very important to discuss, but bearing in mind some positivity as potential solutions that can relate to other conflicts as well, and what are the important lessons learned. So the burning question of today is 2025 the end of nonprofit and social impact careers? We've heard that maybe it's just the beginning, but why in this current moment should we as youth or anybody working in the field be worried or inspired to take action? Either one of you can start. Sarah, would you like to?
Sure. So when I saw this title, I had a physical reaction because I thought, oh my goodness, how can I speak on a panel? And I'm somebody that talks about and promotes peace and promotes positive stories and the importance of hope, not as like fluffy puffy dreams, but actually of courageous hope and how the stories we tell shape how we think. So this is not the end. I don't think this is the end. And I, as the ambassador said, I think it's the beginning. The beginning. Yeah.
Sorry.
Very much the beginning.
I completely agree. It's not the end of social impact work for humanitarian aid, international development, because there's just so much need. All right, there's a lot of defunding right now, a lot of funding cuts. I work for USAID. I lost my job because of the politics, but I don't think. But I think international aid, international development, is going to change. There's not going to be a sole funder of a lot of different projects on the ground in other countries. There's going to be a lot more focus on finance, social enterprises, other multipolar sources of funding. Because, well, I mean, just having one funder is unstable, as we've seen.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, we focus a lot on the money, which is of course very important because that affects people directly. But I think what's also very concerning and where we need more and more people are also on international norms and this notion of the global governance on how we want to solve problems together, because we have really big problems. We have climate change, we have nuclear arms, we have increase in war. This notion that Europe is rearming urgently is for me, very, very concerning. And are we going to solve problems by going to war and using force, or are we going to try to cooperate? And I think we need more and more people who want to make a difference and not only think of this as a career, because I think the difference that we can make goes beyond a title, goes beyond a function, goes beyond working for an organization. And I think it's important to think of it that way, because sometimes you can also lose your job and then feel like you lose your identity, and that shouldn't. That can be a challenge. And I think many people are feeling that heartbreak at work right now in terms of the cuts from USAID. But I think we need more people now more than ever who have a focus on what is really essential.
Okay, so I'm hearing both that it needs to be a transformation of the society, but also that we need more people that are very passionate about upholding these strong international norms and morals and values to cooperation together. I can imagine that international organizations and the humanitarian sector has greatly evolved from the 80s, various positions, academic research that you've had. So what are some of the main differences that you've noticed, or different reframing of international work that you've witnessed throughout your career and lifetime?
So when I was studying, when I started my whole career, there was a lot of do-gooding without any measurements involved, right? It was like, we're gonna go in, we're gonna build a school. And then we're gonna go in, we're gonna give shoes to all the people who need shoes. We're just gonna go and we're gonna give all all this equipment, all these toilets to this country, and it'll be fine. But we found that that doesn't work like that. People need to have a lot of ownership of things for themselves. You need to work directly with the communities on the ground, and you need to measure what the impact is eventually. It can't just be something that is given to people. It needs to be a collaboration between all the parties involved, and especially whoever is working with you in that area. And so that's one of the things I've learned about PeaceTalks. So we've done a lot of different things that didn't work. To talk about failures is really important because there are so many of them. To keep them hidden is not a benefit to anyone. And so the culture of failing is a good thing. The culture of learning is an excellent thing. I can talk about some of the, if you give shoes to a country in need where they don't have shoes, basically you're disrupting the shoe market, for example. And so later on, those shoes will break down, people won't have shoes again, and there won't be anyone to fix it because the market, they have gone out of business because you just gave free shoes and they couldn't sell their shoes. Just for example, a lot of previous work has gone to making schools for example, orphans, or making schools for anyone that needed schooling, but that means that systematically there's who's going to be the teachers in the school, who's going to be maintaining those schools. There's no money involved for any of this, and so it doesn't work unless you have local ownership of the problem. So that is one thing that's very, very strongly changed in humanitarian aid.
Can I add something?
Of course.
I have a kind of interesting background. My father was a former diplomat. So when we were sent to the States, I actually completed my secondary school in the US. And my father was adamant that I was going to be in business or engineering or in law. If I did those three, or a doctor, but he knew I wasn't going to be a doctor by my science background. He was insistent that I study these so I would have a career for life and money for life. Right? I'd be very self-independent. What my father didn't count on is by the time I graduated with a business degree, I did work as I worked at the credit union at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. with the total immigrant view of, I'm going to go work for the credit union, then get into the World Bank and work in the World Bank until I retire or something. I hated finance, absolutely hated it. And the CEO one time invited me for coffee. And I thought he was going to fire me, which is why he's inviting me. So I went with him. He was, in many ways, he was a terror. He would tell everybody, you, I have 10 resumes to replace you. So you can imagine the sort of environment we worked in. So I said, what do I know? I hated the finance. This is an easy way out. Let him give me coffee and fire me. I can go home and tell my dad I got fired. But also said something that changed the trajectory of my life, We bought the coffee, I couldn't keep up with him, we kept burning my hand, I simply threw it out just to keep up with him. We went to his office, and the first thing he said to me, do you love what you do? And I'd never been asked that. I was never actually raised or mentored to think about, do I love what I do? So I figured if I say no, I'm going to get fired, so maybe I should just see where this conversation is going. And he said something interesting to me. He said he studied medical school. His father, his uncle, his brothers, cousins were all medical doctors. And after 2 years, he noticed he hated medicine and changed to finance. So I'm figuring somewhere along the story it's going to be applicable to me. So he said to me, Khadra, I will tell you something. Unless you do what you love in life, life becomes hell on wheels. So he said, I'm not going to ask you to quit. I'm not going to ask you to change your career. I'm just going to ask you to go and think about it. Is this what you love to do? It's like a light went in my head. I went home, thought about it, said, I hate finance. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to go back and do international education, which is what I really wanted to do. So I quit the very next day. He was so happy to see me go. I suppose he gave me like 4 months pay for the courage just to leave. It's like, okay, fine. So I started doing what I really loved. And the first thing I did after I graduated undergrad is work for Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who created a scholarship fund in New York from the Nobel Prize. And at that point, what he was fighting was apartheid. And so I was asking them, well, how are we raising the funding? So the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, MacArthur were funding us to bring them over, but American universities generously gave us room on board. And from there, the board, on our board was Margaret Rockefeller, who went by her name or her mother's name of Peggy Tulaney, because she told me Rockefeller has a connotation, and she works in NGOs and international organizations and elevate poverty in the world. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller name would make it difficult for her. Again, Peggy taught me something that really impacted the rest of my career, and I use those skills up to now. Her organization was called Synogus Institute, and what she was talking about is how to create synergy to go from point A to point B, or from A to Z. And she was saying too many of us in international development think in silos. And she was saying if you put international organizations with research institutes and academia with the business sector, then you could have a larger impact. She said that almost 30 years ago. And it's true, and I don't think that has been implemented or taken advantage of to the level that it actually could. And the other thing that she was talking about, this whole collaboration and partnership, is what I notice in every time I get a new job, is I look for partners. Who can I collaborate with? I came here simply because I believe in the youth. I really believe they're in the future. I think they need it more than ever. I think they need to think out of the box. I think at a critical like this, we need new energies and new ways of thinking. But it's exactly, I'm implementing what I learned in that job, which is building collaborations, building partnerships, figuring out how to get whatever your mission is accomplished. Because no single person should be doing it alone. And even within the international organizations, it's a really challenging time, but there's an opportunity in it. Is how do you collaborate across sections and across sectors and not be silos? And I keep telling, because every time I meet with an international organization, they tell me we spend millions on this and this and this, and unfortunately some of the times it's not seen on the ground. So I was saying, why not pick one real project that the country needs, not what you think the country needs, that is homegrown, and then collaborate among yourselves to leverage those funds in order to help the society or the countries that you're trying to help. But if I go back to what you were saying, this question about, because I did professional development at Carnegie Mellon for 10 years, I find out if you are passionate about what you're doing, if you're committed and you're willing to put in the work, that you can be successful in it. And I think it's a much better route to take than doing the traditional route. If I followed my father, I wouldn't even last one year in finance. But as much as I found him challenging, he gave me the best advice that changed the trajectory of my career. And from then onwards, I always looked in positions where I can have serious impact and where I can leverage all my skill sets, and where every time I go to an organization, I look for mentors, which is really important. It's not even taught in schools. The importance of mentorship in defining careers and actually getting support in careers. I'm talking too much, but the whole notion of is NGOs relevant? I think they are, but I think the way they're going to be working is going to be completely different, and that is actually for challenge for the youth today, is because whatever was going on for the last 30 years. What can you change? What can you make different? And how do you go from A to Z?
Yeah, I also think that international aid, international development is going to be more profit generating. It's going to be more focused on how do they sustain themselves, right? Rather than getting aid from another source. How can you actually make goods or services that you can actually profit from? And I had the same background, but I was a biochemistry major for 3 years. I was going to become a doctor. In Chinese society, it's like, doctor, engineer, lawyer. Which one of these three are you going to become? And then I fell in love with psychology myself, psychology and international development. And I was like, can I look at these two things? So that's why I took an extra year of university just to not do any more biochemistry, and also to do psychology and international relations stuff. So that was really cool.
even in permanent missions, not just NGOs, like right now, I'm seriously looking for researchers and policy analysts. Because with the least development countries as Somalia goes under, we don't have the resources of major and big business missions. You know, they can go into depth about issues. We're touching the surface because we're running from one meeting to another and trying to do this and that, and we don't have the resources. And that's where, like even us at our level right now, we're looking for research. And that's what I was trying to sell to IOM and the international organizations, create research centers. If you really want to help the least development countries, you help our permanent missions. And you can hire them and you can house them in your offices, but they work with us. It also gives you a bird's eye view of what's really needed on the ground. So creative thinking, I think, is also a way. It's like how do you look at the old way of doing things and tweak it to meet the challenges we are. And politics is also, because I'm from Somalia, you know, it goes up and down, you know. 4 years from now, the Trump administration will not be here. Who knows who comes in and then wants to reinvent everything again. So you have to be able to adapt to the times and the changes. You know?
Exactly. I think this notion of adapting is really important, and I think coming also to the question of mindsets, because I think what we're seeing, the world has changed, and in all of our lifetimes it's changed immensely. I mean, we were talking before, Tania, about how, you know, we were born, and it was during the Cold War. There was, you know, 2 blocks that we witnessed the Berlin Wall crumble, the Soviet Union, which was never going to disappear, crumble, and then there was a new power dynamic in place. There was going to be this peace dividend. There was the internet. There was iPhone. There was all of this change. But what's I feel happening now with technology is that the change is just like it's so fast. Yeah. So and also the political changes are happening so fast. So you wake up one morning, you look at the news, and it's one thing. You look at the next day, it's something else. And so what is I find really, really important are the tools that we have to ground ourselves. Because right now, you know, it can be very and just. Regardless of what's happening with these changes, our distraction also is we're constantly being distracted by things. So how do we focus and center to come back to what we really love and what's really essential to us? And so one of the things that I've started practicing, and I can tell you more about this, is something called inner reflection, which is a way for me to take some quiet, which is not always easy, and it's really and it, like when the day has 500 things going on, it's challenging. But it's 5 minutes to be with myself, to kind of ask myself what's going on and to reconnect. And that is very grounding. And I think, I mean, there's that technique, there are many other techniques, but I think that will be really important, because even myself, I read the news some days and I just want to go back and crawl into bed. And I oscillate between fear and hope. And so I think having tools or systems that you use that work for you, that help really ground you in, this is the person I am and this is how I live with my values, is really, really important, more important than ever.
Right. I think that's really important. So staying true to what you love, being able to take a moment for your own reflection, but then also think about what's coming forward in the future. And I think that kind of leads me into my next point. What might you be forecasting as some of the challenges that organizations that are dealing with human rights, social financing, and international development, some of the challenges and issues that they might be facing in the next few months or even the next few years following all of the developments that we've just seen alone since the start of January?
Right. I mean, for something that USA was already moving towards was collaborating with private sector. Now, this is a controversial step. Maybe now it's more acceptable, but for example, in Madagascar, we were trying to get clean water to the population because we knew that this would automatically decrease a lot of the problems that were there health-wise. And so we collaborated with Coca-Cola. And that was controversial because people didn't trust Coca-Cola. You're working with people just to sell Coca-Cola there. But the thing is, Coca-Cola was really good at cleaning water and large quantities of water really quickly and then distributing it. They had amazing distribution networks. We could piggyback on top of all of that and deliver clean water. And so it was an amazing project. Like, it's just the quickness of using private sector resources is really, really positive. So that's a trend that I think is going to go on now more, right? And this is also profit-driven social impact is going to rise more and more and more. It's not just corporate social responsibility, but it's also something that makes development projects sustainable. It's not just aid, but also just working together to actually do something which adds, but also gives you more money to work with later. And that makes projects sustainable.
Definitely. So going back to the transformative partnerships and new opportunities for collaboration as well.
I'm worried about how the voices for peace are being crowded out by the voices of war. I think this is very difficult in the peace building sector in terms of how we tell the narrative and story about peace, and how we are now really called on to make a solid case for why peace is more important than war. I think all of you in this room understand that that's not even a question, but I think it's concerning when the rules and the norms that have been in place for such a long time have been continuously disregarded, not just recently, but like over time, and the respect for international humanitarian law. And this is concerning. At the same time, with every crisis you can say there's an opportunity, and what does this mean for the UN, which is a system that is outdated and isn't necessarily aligned with the powers and the way that the world works today. It's just more of the question of it. And we've been talking about the need for change and the need for reform. It's more the question of what fills that void, what comes there. Is it an opportunity for a more equal distribution of wealth, more equal distribution of power in the Security Council, or is it something else? So I'm not sure. I don't have a crystal ball, and I wouldn't want to predict what the future has in store. But I think there's money, but then there's also the fundamental norms and values that we want to have as a quote-unquote international community, or and how I come back to this, how we solve the big problems that we face. And I'm hoping that it's one focused more on cooperation, on dialogue, but I think we need to make the case more for that now than ever.
Another trend is something that's dear to my heart since I've been working on it for 20 years. It's measurements, basically. Like, we need to measure the impact of what we do. If it's just like we are going to do good, it's not measurable, and it's not going to be very well effectively gone to. But if you want to do something like decrease malnutrition in a particular place, we can actually measure that. But how, right? Like, it's not just malnutrition, it has to be stunting, different ways of measuring that kind of thing, and then we can actually see how long it takes us to get to a certain place. So I think that is going to be more and more important increasingly as we go forward too.
Right, so how are some ways that young leaders or anybody in the audience right now can position themselves to best deal and grapple with these issues of measurement, reframing the narratives, but also creating positive impact in their own careers? And how are some ways that people can remain transformative in their motivations and resilient when so many narratives are negative and can potentially make you feel just almost a sense of despair?
I don't have a crystal ball on this, but I've been thinking about it a bit. But new technologies are constantly being invented. AI is going to really drastically change the face of our society today. Like, we have, it's just mobile phones. So we're talking about mobile phones. We didn't have a mobile phone when I was in college. We didn't have any. We had a Nokia, and that was amazing, right? Just like the things that had no screen, right? Now we have smartphones, and those are used for mobile payments all over the world, across Kenya, across many, many countries. And that's a new development that really pulls people into the finance system and gives people the ability to have loans, to get more money so that they can really put their kids in school and have better lives and just generally improve themselves, so act as self-improvers. So that kind of thing is going to change the face of poverty relief.
But if you look at Somalia, nobody actually carries cash. There's no money going around. Everything is mobile banking, and the speed it works is quite amazing, honestly. But that was after the war, the banking sector completely collapsed. So everything went into mobile banking, and we have some of the best technology in Somalia. That the one sector that got rebuilt very, very quickly became out of necessity. You know, so you go in a restaurant, you pay by your phone. You know, the rent is due, you pay by your phone.
Exactly.
So everything. So in a way, there's efficiency. But again, you know, when you get major challenges, people do think outside of the box, and it's like, how can I, you know, survive, and how can I, you know, make a living? So that company is now it is a multi-billion-dollar company, but they just also monopolize the whole internet. You know, they're the internet providers, they're the mobile banking providers. So especially when I was doing the WTO accession for Somalia, it was very hard to get them to give up power because they would almost enjoy being a monopoly. But I couldn't get them to understand you could make more money if you allow for fair trade. I think if you look, there's a lot of conflicts going on. You see the West and the South, North, South. There's a lot going on, but the big thing is, like in Africa and in the Middle East and in Asia, the demographic favors the youth. In Somalia, 80% are under the age of 30, and that's really in Africa and also in the Middle East. What does that mean? The old ways of doing things are going to change, whether the old people like it or not. And you're living in a time where even in America, the baby movers are getting ready to retire. And then you also see the socio-economic conflicts, which is young people getting worried about their future and in a serious manner. And some of the changes that are happening are also not favoring their future. So they understand that. And I do believe in those kind of conditions, you will be seeing more youth doing more interesting stuff to make life, it's not like the 50s, but at least I kept telling my boss, if you see young people angry at work, the American dream is no longer, they don't think it's available for them. And in Africa, like I said, at times people are shutting off the West in the sense of the news and all of that, and people are discussing how do we survive. So it comes to the basics, you know. So in the last few years, you've seen a lot of development of Somali diaspora going back and giving back to the country for two reasons. One, feeling more and more alienated in the West and feeling like let me go back to my grassroots, and also coming back with money to the hotels. Like if you see Kenya in the last 5 years, changed dramatically. So with every challenge, I believe there's an opportunity out there. And young people are capable of coming up with, the technology favors them, come up with amazing stuff. I have young Somalis I was working with that really barely spoke English, and they would bring me these papers I couldn't believe, what is going on? And they say, you haven't chat something, it's like, oh, you put the whole thing in there and this is what he gave you out. That's a bad analogy, but I'm saying, I honestly, being African myself, when you have challenges, your mind is always wired to how do I break this challenge? How can I solve it, and all of that. And having lived in the West, predominantly the majority of my life, one of the things I'm noticing, you have so much news. You're overwhelmed with news. But then, I hate to call it ignorance, but this general knowledge of what's happening in Africa or China or Asia is still pretty low. And that's frightening in itself because of the power that the West has held for many centuries over the rest of the world. Is not to understand like the population now favors the South. How can you not understand what's going on? And with the retreat of dollars and donors in the West, then you have powers in China. China is very active in Africa. That will fill that opportunity. Is that in the interest? shouldn't there be a balance for a safe society? So there's many things that needs to be delved into a little bit more deeply that sometimes you find out is not being addressed as it should be.
Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful.
I was just going to add, I think the point you made, Madam Ambassador, about imagination and being able to think differently, and I guess the question also is, how can we do that in a society that's so oversaturated with news and negativity? Because when we hear negative things, our brain shuts down, because it's wired for self-preservation. So how can you open your mind? Is it a question of reading more positive news? Is it a question of identifying stories? I have one that I particularly love. It's about a hummingbird. Wangari Maathai, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, it was the first woman from Africa to win the Nobel Peace Prize, tells this. I suggest you check this out. It's a beautiful story. I use in a reflection to try to recenter, but there may be other tools that you want to use. But I think those, not just feeling doom and gloom and being overwhelmed, because we have to be able to step out of that, to think creatively, to come up with the new solutions that we need. And I would also add, because I think imagination often is underrated, or it's something that our little kids do, and it's wonderful. But then when you go to the UN or to places, it's something that is done in Silicon Valley, but it's not necessarily done in international relations. And I think the importance of connection, because I think one of the challenges with technology can be amazing, but also can leave us so connected that we're disconnected. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but having a coffee with somebody, or not just sending. I know that our generations have different ways of communicating, but I just being connected with people in a human, in a physical way, is, I think, really important. For all of us, but also in terms of finding job opportunities, or just understanding what makes us human. Because I think this is also something, as AI comes, that will be questioned a little bit in terms of what are the essential cores of what it means to be human. So I think there are some things.
One of the amazing things about you guys being here in Geneva is that it's connected to so many different countries. Like people from this background, who speak all these different languages. That's just something that is amazing about this place, and I've never found it anywhere else. So please use that for your networks.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your answers and your words of inspiration. I would like to open it up to the audience if anybody has any questions for our speakers.
Okay. Yes, my name is Tania, faculty lead, I'm a kind of associate professor here. Thank you. I want to tell a story because I have to tell at this point. No, until last year I was in fact a municipality council in Geneva. And in fact, my best friend was Hamed Jama, who is from Somali descendant. And Hamed Jama was there for 10 years in the municipality council. And in fact, he was immigrants because he was, not with very low immigrants, kind of in the 90s or with his parents. And then he grew and he had a small job, and then now he's a permanent job somewhere. But then he really entered politics at the lowers, and then he grew, and last year was the vice president of the city council, and this year and yesterday he was re-elected. And most likely for 3-4 years, will be maybe this year, because the Socialist Party won the most elections, and most likely this year will be the first president of the municipality council. I tell you all of this because at the same time, as this is root Somalia, he sends money to Somalia. He just keeps forwarding all the time to Somalia, what can we do? And then he keeps this relationship in kind of development aid, and at the same time being here, really rooted in the two places. And he told me all the time, hey Dennis, can you help me? Because I'm on the development aid, and I tell you, okay, this organization doing that and that. But then I really noticed that even though he grew in these amazing things, and I think it will be amazing in the coming months, he really needs all the time partners that are more like institutional partners that can bring this scientific knowledge, because he does everything intuitively, And at the same time, he also needs other ways, to bring the other layers, this more like the UN or the governmental layers. He doesn't have this connection because it comes here from really the bottom. And I think that's exactly what, in fact, you are mentioning. It's about collaboration, to be adaptive. And also, there are two things that you mentioned that are very crucial for me. It's about this idea of first, that you do because of passion and love. He does because of passion, love, even this. But in fact, it means that himself can only connect with this type of people, This type of person, if you are talking about career, that you do that for get like $10,000 a month, he doesn't understand you and doesn't even like you already because you see that he has a pension plan, you never heard about that. And then, when you're in so many pension plan, what does it mean? And therefore, we are totally disconnected with the even understanding of these people, both locally here and both in Somalia or in the different places. In Madagascar, I also did impact assessment in Madagascar. It was impressive, it was only last year. But then you discover that the people are happy and they say, okay, does it work politically, economically, socially? And then discover that they live basically with $3 a day, and they still think that the project is going sustainable enough to go back to the government, telling them it's a very sustainable project. But, then therefore, and I tell them what is going on when this project is finished. They say, it's okay, nice work together. I say, yeah, but sure. Because where do we invest? And they tell me all the time, we invest in our children. That's always the topic. They don't invest in their pension plan or their money. And therefore, there is something that we need, and I think to go back to some basic in development is really to think that we work with the society we are in at the society level, and basically we don't do that for a career, but basically because we really are passionate for that. Which comes to the other things, which has been quite difficult because I think that development aid, especially lately, has become quite careerist away in the kind of quite bureaucratic, especially in the UN, which I quite know well because I work there. And basically, a lot of people, even my friends, now they think, oh my God, I've still like 6-7 years to get my retreat. It's really discussion I have because when you get 50, you get 25 years. After 25 years, okay, they have this type of discussion. They are supposed to work to help people, and therefore there's this issue there. It's about the transformation of society. What is our belief? Oh, we can really create something, and that's something that is so essential, and at the same time I don't honestly know how to do it, because at the moment, as you say so well, we're just poured by so negative information all the time about war, and then basically we cannot even think creatively, we cannot work creatively, and it's I think that's the most difficult part, I think, is to keep our imagination that can create another type of society. And I even like to hear from you about that, because that's my worst worry. I have the impression that so far there's no other way, you understand? It's either we are going to war, arming, and okay, we can do that for love, or for passion, but it's not sufficient. We need also to have a transformative way where all together work together, and that I don't see. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think working with people, having connecting, not just working online together, not at distance, but actually as humans together and having friendships. I think that's one way forward. And I think this is just speculation, but like having the panel discussions and things like that, I see in the future much more things like collaborative, things that are flash talks, for example, are a new phenomenon where you only give 5-10 minutes for each speaker to give their talk, then everybody actually pays attention, right? Or having small group sessions where each small group has to present something at the end of the small group discussion. Things like that are of more collaborative nature than having big, really formal UN panel people sitting here just delivering and people in the audience not listening. So I think that kind of communication will hopefully start to shift to a more human conversation.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, I'm Melissa from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and thank you all for your wonderful words, wisdom, which I could relate to. I want just on the point of imagination and thinking creatively, Einstein said that he never made a single one of his scientific discoveries through a process of rational thinking. It was all through imagination and insight. And author Yuval Noah Harari talks about the power of human imagination to redirect our ingenuity from self-destruction to self-creation. So I think we were talking about, Sarah, was, you know, talking about peace, bringing peace back into making peace cool again. What we really need to do. An updated version from the hippies, but still, yeah, I think that's really important. And the other thing I just wanted to highlight and to emphasise was the need for connection. When we are all connected, I think people are increasingly learning what Indigenous peoples of the world have known forever, that, you know, we're not separate from nature, but we're a part of it. And what we're doing at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons is to try to de-silo it, because, you know, when I first arrived in this role just a year and a half ago, I noticed that the only people talking about nuclear weapons are disarmament and security so-called experts. And yet, everything we love, everyone we love, is threatened to be destroyed and killed by nuclear weapons. Everyone has a stake in this issue. You do not have to be an expert to know that that is wrong, that that is a moral injury to humanity and the planet. And so I think, I think connection is really important. Like showing how things are all of these issues are interconnected. Nuclear weapons to the environment, to health, to human rights, to food security, to humanitarian affairs and so forth. So.
I completely agree with you, and I also believe for people who are working in peace, you can't have peace if people are not talking together.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, in order to solve a conflict, you have to be hearing both sides of the situation. And I think it was the head of the human rights. The UN human rights, who is saying the increase of conflicts. And that alone tells you there has been a huge degradation of people talking together and actually solving the conflicts before they completely go out of control. And I was, in a recent Human Rights Council, I was saying, if you encourage people not to live up to their values, you're actually doing them a huge disservice. Now, if we could be honest about what is wrong and what is right, then we would all be living in a much safer global environment. And I mean that in the sense that my sister got cancer, malignant cancer, and then her children sensed their mother was unwell. You know, the girl was 3 and the boy was 5, and intuitively they knew their mother was not well. But traditionally, we fell back on, your mother is okay, she's just tired, she's asleep, you know, she just needs to rest. And they've seen their mother jogging and being active. So we finally did some counseling, and I never forgot what the counselor said to us, and I think the whole international community needs to hear it. She said, what you guys are doing is teaching the kids not to trust their instincts. You're actually crazy making at this point. Because instinctively these kids in their guts know their mother is not well. But you keep telling them, she's okay, she's just resting. And what I mean is, there's so many things like right now at the international level that needs to be fixed. But we're conditioned to be really like crazy making behavior. Oh no, it's okay. Oh no, this is tolerable. Oh no, this is acceptable. When in our heart of hearts, we know it's not acceptable. And that's what worries me in this day and age, that we're refusing to call a spade, and how much longer can we do that? And does that guarantee any of our safety? Because what happens in Africa will affect Europe. What happens in Europe definitely affects Africa and the Middle East. So this interconnectedness that we need to be talking about, and working towards, it actually is working in the opposite direction, where we're becoming more and more decisive, where power overrides everything, and where again really is like that counselor said, we're living in a sort of a crazy making situation, you know.
Maybe to pick up on that and this notion of imagination, I think there's a big role for the arts to play, not just as something that's beautiful and that comes to our events, but it's actually how is that integrated into a process. So there's been some research done that mediators, if they listen to music before mediation, of the role that it plays on their self-regulation. And I don't think that this happens very often, but it would be interesting if this was something that was more accepted. The notion of mental health and the role that art can play in mental health. The World Health Organization had some studies recently that were showing that in some prisoners of war from Ukraine, they were using arts-based therapy and were able to access something that they couldn't access by cognitive-based therapy, by speaking, and they were able to make progress. So I think that there's something that of things that are to create is something that's human. That's something that we do. I mean, we've created AI and it might create other things, but so I think we need to come back to this notion of creation. I'm not sure how to integrate this into international relations, but there is something around arts and peace. And actually, the Caux Foundation is having a Arts and Peace Encounter. Sorry, I didn't do the propaganda, but from the 12th to the 14th of May, where we're bringing artists and change makers together to understand what we can learn from each other. But I think the imagination needs to be something that is revered and not feared.
Another point adding to that is just there's more and more talk of mental well-being. Mental health is becoming much more a topic. When I started, I worked in disaster relief. And disaster relief, it was like, this is shelters, this one's food, this one is markets, right? Like these specific silos, like you said, right? Now, actually, we hear a lot about psychological well-being. Having a social worker, having a point of contact to just listen to people. And just by listening, they can point out places that people can go, help that whatever that individual needs, even just the act of listening really goes a long way to helping individuals in distress. They don't have to do therapy, it's just having someone there for you, and putting that kind of system in is now one of the standards in international aid. So.
Great, yeah. Shruti, you had a question?
Is there time for
Please.
we still have time?
A few minutes. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So hi, I'm Shruti. I'm a student here and I'm graduating this year. So my question is a little bit difficult, I think a bit more on the realistic, like what should I do sort of situation. Because we see a lot of internships that are unpaid. The budget cuts are instituting hiring freezes in many organizations. And I'm unlucky, to have, financial privilege that, I have support from my parents, but I know that a lot of people do not have such privileges. So I was wondering what advice you would give to them. How should they proceed? Of course, we want everyone to follow their passions for the humanitarian sector, for peace building, for social work, but what happens if it's not realistic? And what would be your advice?
Just with USAID, 40% of international aid is cut now from the world, just by that one act alone. So I think not going to certain donors, there is going to be moved more towards foundations, more the Caux Foundation, for example, like large individual donors, large company donors, and also faith-based organizations have World Vision, for example, is a Christian organization. There's also Muslim organizations. These will have more say in the international development world.
I think it will become more competitive, because there will be, as there's less money, but perhaps there will be money that's found elsewhere. But I if I was in your shoes, I would make sure to do the traditional things, to network, to meet people, to connect with them, to get to know people and to ask for people to introduce you to other people, as you were saying, Madam Ambassador, in terms of mentoring, or find people that you can connect with, because that's, at the end of the day, even if there's budget cuts, that's how, people often like to have word of mouth in terms of people that they that they hire. So I think a lot of the stuff that you've probably been told to do, you should still do, and that doesn't change it. You might feel a bit more pressure, but I would do what you're doing.
If I may, I would say be very flexible and be very versatile in what you do, and be multi-skilled, particularly if you're in the humanities. I worked for NGOs, I worked for universities, I worked for foundations, and that all gave me different sets of skills. So while this turbulence goes in the market at the moment, try universities or research centers or foundations. And I'm not saying you're going to be stuck there, because like I said, I tried different things depending on what the market could bear at that point. That's something you can think about doing. And again, I would also encourage young people to put their thoughts and brains together, that kind of creating a synergy. If there's something that you're strong at and you have another friend who has other different strengths, see what you can do together. Entrepreneurship is also, for us, one of our biggest markets are productive sector, fisheries, livestock, and agriculture. We failed in actually teaching us, the young Somalis, to look for futures in these sectors. So even though we could be extremely self-sufficient, if we found ways to extract the fishes or the agriculture or the livestock, I keep saying them, maybe invite other people to help us using technology to make these sectors more profitable. And again, what you were saying about the shoes, because Somalia was importing so much food that it didn't make it easier on the farmers to bringing out the crops. So now that they know that all of these FAO's cutting back, this is cutting back, this gives an opportunity for Somalis and our youth and our young and people who want to partner with us, even at an investment level. So I would truly think out of the box. I would look wide and see what countries, what their challenges are, what their needs are, and even among yourselves come up with some sort of a group that can actually, even from big business, getting money from them, God knows the world is overwhelmed with billionaires, and say, okay, do you want to make another billion? Here's a way to do it. So I would use your skill sets, I would use your connections, I would find a mentor, because I remember the best advice I got in graduate school when I was graduating NYU was to meet people, and everybody knows other people, and just to tell them, tell them what you're interested in, and they might say, oh, I know someone, and you go and say, well, do you mind if you give me or connect me to that person? And you ask that other person, do you mind if you connect me to 2 or 3 people that you know that might be in need of somebody with my skill sets? So this also is another way of going about it.
Following on that, digitalization is a growing field. So digitalization of agriculture, showing videos of farming techniques, that's a big thing that's growing. Health as well, remote diagnosis, because that's the place you can't go.
Agriculture is a big thing throughout Africa. People went really, like I said, most parents wanted their children to be doctors, lawyers, engineers, and all of that. But it's only now that young people, because the majority of the market is civil servants, are trying to do things on their own. And if you can find a way to make these sectors grow quickly or profitably for the societies, that's something you could even think about. And it's just not Somalia. Most of Africa that has an agricultural base is so underutilized and undercapitalized.
Well, thank you for all of your stories. It was very valuable hearing all of your experience, and thank you.
I would like to add that because we tend to think about the UN and the foundation and the NGOs, but in fact in the future it will be a lot also for the private sector. Why? Because there are big players, but they also have foundations that both either directly or indirectly through their foundations that you can really approach them. Like you said, maybe as a network, the only idea is that you need to have an idea, because usually they are the need, the demand, they don't have the right ID, then you can come with the ID and then make the ID happen, and you can have money to implement them for them, with them. Because in implementation process themselves, there are a lot of problems to implement to the ground, because as you see at the local, what we need is to make sure that what we do is integrated in the local social framework. And usually working the development, that you are very good at that, and private sector is not necessarily very good at that. You can really support that.
There's a case in northern Somalia of a school called Abarazo. It's K through 12. I think maybe it's secondary. But the guy who runs it is an American. He was a stockbroker in New York City. His aunt was married to a Somali who worked in the UN. So he decided to go to Hargeisa and open this school. It's completely privately funded. But all of those schools, the curriculum is so strong and the demand is so high that just literally all the graduates have received scholarships in Ivy League universities in the US. And to their credit, they're actually coming back into the society and making a difference. And this is just one young man got disillusioned with the stock market and working in that, and decided just to visit Africa, and decided there's a need for a really a good science and math high school. And it's amazing what the graduates have been able to accomplish. Education is a huge need in Africa. And actually alternative, not, for years we were just churning out civil servants and bureaucrats and politicians, but really going back to like how do these societies' economy grow, particularly with the 8 challenges that are happening.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming here today. I think we're going to wrap it up, and we'd like to invite you to join us in a brief apéro after the event. But thank you so much for your time and sharing your experiences with us. Again, thank you very much.